The silence was deafening in the Birmingham arena that July evening. The stage lights had dimmed for the final time. The last chord had faded into history, and somewhere, backstage, a legend was whispering 10 words that would haunt his wife, Sharon Osbourne, forever. Words so simple, yet so profound. They captured the essence of a man who had just given everything he had left to the city that made him one last time. "I can't believe this is how it all ends, Sharon." Those were the words Ozzy Osbourne spoke to his beloved wife of over 4 decades after what none of them knew would be his final performance. July 2nd, 2025, a date that would forever mark the end of an era. The Prince of Darkness had returned home to Birmingham, the same streets where a young John Michael Osbourne once dreamed of escape through music. Now witnessing his final bow, Sharon Osbourne's hands trembled as she shared these intimate details in an exclusive interview just days after losing the love of her life. The woman who had stood by Ozzy through decades of chaos, addiction, health battles, and triumph was now left to carry his final message to the world. But to understand the weight of those 10 words, we need to journey back through a love story that defied every odd, survived every storm, and ultimately became one of rock and roll's greatest romances. It was 1979 when Sharon first laid eyes on Ozzy Osbourne. He wasn't the global superstar yet. He was a broken man, recently fired from Black Sabbath, drowning his sorrows and convinced his musical career was over. Sharon, then just 27 years old and daughter of music manager Don Arden, saw something in this wild-haired madman that no one else could see. Not the headlines, not the controversies, not the self-destruction, but the wounded artist beneath it all. Their first meeting was anything but romantic. Ozzy was passed out in his own vomit on Sharon's father's office floor. Most people would have walked away. Sharon cleaned him up, got him sober enough to talk, and asked him a question that would change both their lives forever. "What do you want to do with your music?" That question sparked something in Ozzy that had been dormant, hope. From that moment, Sharon didn't just become his manager. She became his salvation. She saw potential where others saw problems. She saw a solo career where others saw a has-been. She saw the man behind the madness, and slowly, painstakingly, she helped him see it too. Their professional relationship quickly blurred into something deeper, more complex, more beautiful than either had ever experienced. The early years of their romance read like a rock and roll fairy tale, written in chaos. Sharon guided Ozzy's solo career with the fierce determination of a woman in love, turning him from Black Sabbath's troubled ex-frontman into a solo sensation. Albums like Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman weren't just musical comebacks, they were love letters to possibility. Crafted by a partnership that believed in magic when the rest of the world had given up. But love in the Osbourne world was never simple. Ozzy's demons were real, dark, and relentless. Alcohol and drugs weren't just habits. They were the ghosts of a working-class kid from Birmingham who never believed he deserved the life he was living. Sharon watched the man she loved battle these demons night after night, sometimes winning, often losing, but never giving up the fight entirely. Their wedding day in 1982 was pure Ozzy and Sharon, unconventional, passionate, and slightly insane. Instead of a traditional ceremony, they exchanged vows in a small ceremony that was more about their private commitment than public spectacle. Sharon wore a simple dress. Ozzy wore his uncertainty about whether he deserved happiness. But in that moment, surrounded by just a few close friends, two damaged souls found something neither had ever experienced: unconditional love. The decades that followed were a masterclass in partnership through adversity. When Ozzy struggled with addiction, Sharon didn't just stand by him, she fought for him. When critics dismissed his music, she became his fiercest advocate. When the world saw only the crazy train antics and the bat-biting headlines, Sharon saw the tender father who sang lullabies to their children, and the husband who still left her love notes after 20 years of marriage. Their 3 children, Naomi, Kelly, and Jack, grew up watching this complex dance of love and chaos. They saw their father at his worst and their mother's unwavering strength in those moments. They also saw something the public rarely glimpses: the quiet moments when Ozzy would hold Sharon's hand during his darkest hours, when she would stroke his hair during his anxiety attacks, when they would laugh together at inside jokes that had sustained them through decades of storms. The reality show? The Osbournes in the early 2000s gave the world a window into their unconventional family dynamic, but it barely scratched the surface of the deep, complicated love that anchored it all. Behind the cameras, Sharon was fighting her own battles, cancer diagnoses that she faced with the same fierce determination she brought to protecting her family. And in those moments, it was Ozzy's turn to be the strength she had always been for him. As the years passed, new challenges emerged. Ozzy's Parkinson's disease diagnosis in 2003 marked the beginning of a different kind of fight. The man who had conquered stages around the world was now battling an enemy he couldn't defeat with volume and attitude. His hands, once steady enough to deliver legendary vocal performances, began to shake. His gait, once commanding on stage, became uncertain. Sharon watched the love of her life wage this new war with the same courage he had brought to every other battle. But this time was different. This was an addiction that could be overcome with determination and love. This wasn't controversy that could be weathered with time. This was time itself, claiming its due from a man who had lived several lifetimes in 74 years. The decision to do a final tour was agonizing. Ozzy's body was failing, but his spirit remained unbroken. He wanted to say goodbye properly, to give something back to the fans who had carried him through every triumph and tribulation. Sharon, ever his protector, worried about the physical toll, but she also understood what music meant to her husband. It wasn't just his career. It was his soul made audible. The final tour was both celebration and heartbreak. Night after night, Sharon watched from the side of the stage as Ozzy summoned every ounce of strength he had left to deliver performances that defied his physical limitations. His voice, weathered but still powerful, carried decades of pain and joy. His presence, though more fragile than before, still commanded every room he entered. Birmingham was always going to be the end. It was where John Michael Osbourne had been born, where Black Sabbath had first practiced in a cramped rehearsal room, where a young man with big dreams and limited options had first imagined a life beyond the steel mills and factory floors. Coming home to Birmingham for his final show wasn't just poetic, it was inevitable. The preparation for that final Birmingham show was emotionally overwhelming for the entire family. Sharon later revealed that Ozzy barely slept the week before. He would sit in their hotel room, staring out at the city lights, talking about the strange, circular nature of life. He spoke about the working-class neighborhoods where he'd grown up, about the first time he'd heard the Beatles and realized music could be more than just background noise, about the moment he understood that his voice, rough, untrained, but uniquely his, could move people. On the night of July 2, 2025, Birmingham's arena was electric with an energy that transcended normal concert excitement. This wasn't just a show, it was a homecoming, a celebration, and a goodbye, all wrapped into one impossible-to-replicate moment. Fans who had followed Ozzy for decades stood next to young people discovering the magic for the first time. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation and love. When Ozzy walked onto that stage for the final time, Sharon was watching from her usual spot, close enough to help if needed, far enough away to let him have his moment with the audience that had given meaning to his life. She had watched him take that walk thousands of times before, but this time felt different. this time felt final. The performance itself was everything Ozzy had hoped for and everything Sharon had feared. He gave absolutely everything he had left, pouring for decades of experience, pain, joy, and love into every song. His voice cracked during the emotional moments, but it soared during the anthems. His body struggled, but his spirit was luminous. For 2 hours, the Prince of Darkness reminded everyone, including himself, why he had become a legend. The final song was Paranoid, the Black Sabbath anthem that had launched his journey into rock immortality. As the last notes rang out and the crowd's roar filled every corner of the arena, Ozzy stood at the edge of the stage, arms raised, drinking in a moment he somehow knew he would never experience again. The man who had spent his life convinced he didn't deserve love was surrounded by tens of thousands of people proving him wrong. Backstage, after the show, the adrenaline that had carried Ozzy through the performance began to fade, and the physical reality of what he had just given set in. Sharon found him sitting in a quiet corner of his dressing room, still in his stage clothes, staring at nothing and everything. She sat beside him, taking his hand, a gesture that had comforted both of them through every crisis they had faced together. It was then, just in that vulnerable moment between the public triumph and the private reality, that Ozzy spoke those 10 words that would echo in Sharon's heart forever. "I can't believe this is how it all ends, Sharon." The simplicity of the statement masked its profound complexity. It wasn't just about the show ending, or even about his career reaching its conclusion. It was about a man looking back on a life that had exceeded every expectation he had ever dared to have for himself. The boy from Birmingham who had expected to work in a factory until he died had instead traveled the world, touched millions of lives, and found a love story that had sustained him through everything life could throw at him. Sharon's response, she later revealed, was equally simple but equally profound. She squeezed his hand and said, "It's not an ending, Oz. It's a completion." Those words seemed to comfort him in a way that nothing else could. The man who had spent his life running from his demons had finally outrun them, not through escape, but through acceptance. The 3 weeks between that final show and Ozzy's passing on July 22nd were, according to Sharon, some of the most peaceful of their entire relationship. They spent their days talking about memories, playing with their grandchildren, and enjoying the kind of quiet companionship that only comes after decades of shared experience. Ozzy's Parkinson's symptoms seemed to stabilize, as if his body was giving him one final gift of clarity and comfort. During those precious weeks, Ozzy often returned to that final show in Birmingham. He would tell Sharon stories about moments from the performance, how the crowd's energy had lifted him, how he had felt his father's presence watching from somewhere beyond, how the music had felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. He spoke about feeling complete in a way he had never experienced before. Sharon treasures those conversations now, understanding that they were Ozzy's way of making peace with a life that had been anything but peaceful. He wasn't afraid of what was coming. He was grateful for what had been. The man who had once written songs about paranoia and madness had found, in his final days, a deep sense of contentment and acceptance. When the end came, it was as Sharon had always hoped it would be: peaceful, surrounded by love, and without the struggle that had defined so much of his life. Ozzy passed away in his sleep, with Sharon by his side, holding the same hand that had gripped microphones, written love letters, and fought through decades of battles, both public and private. Sharon's decision to share Ozzy's final words from that Birmingham show wasn't made lightly. She struggled with whether such private moments should remain private. But ultimately, she realized that those 10 words, "I can't believe this is how it all ends," Sharon captured something universal about love, loss, and the beautiful disbelief that comes from a life lived fully in the days following Ozzy's passing. Sharon found herself returning to that moment backstage over and over again, Not because it brought her pain, but because it reminded her of something crucial. Their love story hadn't ended with his death. It had been completed. Every fight they had survived, every demon they had conquered together, every moment of joy they had shared, it all led to that final, peaceful moment when Ozzy could look back on his life with wonder rather than regret. The public remembers Ozzy Osbourne as the Prince of Darkness, the man who bit the head off a bat, the reality TV patriarch, the heavy metal legend who inspired generations of musicians. All of those things are true, and all of them are important parts of his legacy. But Sharon's memories are different, more intimate, more human. She remembers the man who cried during Casablanca every time they watched it together. She remembers the father who never missed a school play or soccer game when he was home. She remembers the husband who still brought her coffee in bed after 40 years of marriage, even when his hands shook from Parkinson's. She remembers the artist who never stopped being amazed that people connected with his music, right up until his final performance. Those 10 words, "I can't believe this is how it all ends," Sharon, weren't a lament. They were an expression of gratitude, disguised as disbelief. Ozzy Osbourne, the working-class kid from Birmingham who never expected to live past 30, had been given a life beyond his wildest dreams. He had found love that sustained him, music that fulfilled him, and family that grounded him. He had touched millions of lives and been touched by millions in return, as Sharon continues to navigate life without her partner of over 4 decades. She carries those final words not as a burden, but as a reminder of the extraordinary journey they shared. The story of Sharon and Ozzy Osbourne isn't just a rock and roll romance. It's a testament to the transformative power of believing in someone when they can't believe in themselves, of standing by love when love requires courage, and of finding beauty in chaos. The Prince of Darkness has taken his final bow. But the light he brought to Sharon's life, to his family, and to millions of fans around the world continues to shine. And somewhere, in the quiet moments when Sharon misses him most, she can still hear his voice, not singing the heavy metal anthems that made him famous, but speaking those 10 simple words that captured the wonder of a life lived in full partnership with the person who saw his light when all he could see was darkness. "I can't believe this is how it all ends, Sharon." But it wasn't an ending. It was, as Sharon had told him, a completion. The completion of one of rock and roll's greatest love stories, told not just in music and headlines, but in the quiet moments between a husband and wife who prove that love, real love, can survive anything, even time itself.